I infrequently agree with Lindsey Graham on a number of issues, judges, immigration, and so forth. But he said something the other day on Brother Sean Hannity's program, which has said to be controversial. And he's taking a lot of incoming from the Putin wing of the Republican Party, from the Putin Pravda-related American press, and of course, from the American Marxists and the Democrat Party. And what is it? He suggested in so many words that it would be nice if a hero would step up who's in Putin's inner circle and take him out. And that created controversy. I'm not exactly sure why that created controversy. And so Lindsey Graham, for that, has taken more heat than Vladimir Putin has for actually using assassination and murder in order to stay in power, in order to gain power, and in order to try and take out the president of Ukraine. Here we have a piece in the Daily Mail. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has survived 3 assassination attempts in the past week. Plots were foiled by double agents within what is the old KGB and now the new FSB. Turns out that the Wagner Group, which I'll get to in a second, and I've talked to about on radio, is behind 2 of the attempts, and then Chechnyan Hit Squad is behind 1 of the attempts. Obviously, they were all sent there by Putin. There's said to be 400 members of this Wagner Group, which is based in Africa, which is a mercenary, secretive hit group, a quasi-military arm of Putin's army, in Kiev that were placed there in advance of this war. And they were foiled by subversive anti-war members within Russia's Federal Security Service, this according to the Daily Mail, the successor to the KGB, who alerted Ukrainian officials. Ukrainian Secretary of National Security and Defense confirmed the attempts. One group that reportedly tried to kill him was this shadowy Wagner Group, which has 400 members located in Kiev. They infiltrated Ukraine with a 24-name kill list. So they have a hit list of assassinations that they are supposed to undertake on behalf of Putin. The other group was Chechnyan, which are elite soldiers as part of the Russian National Guard and are known for their brutal tactics. And of course, Zelensky is the #1 target. So Putin came to power and has held power through assassination. Now, how do we know that? Because it's very, very well documented. In fact, our country has warned the United Nations, and the United Nations is well aware that Russia has a kill list of Ukrainians to be detained or killed should they capture any of these individuals, including Zelensky, his cabinet, members of parliament, journalists, on and on and on. And in fact, Homeland Security Newswire, yes, I do my research, has put together, way back in August of 2020, the list is longer now, Putin's victims, a long list of people who've been disappeared or murdered, who've dared to question Putin. We have his intelligence operatives have killed many domestic critics, opposition politicians, journalists, investigative reporters, academicians, and artists, and more than a dozen Russian defectors, like Alexandra Letovnenko in London in 2006. Russian intelligence operatives have also killed Russians who were not outspoken critics of the regime, leading Russian experts to speculate that Putin has adopted a milder version of Stalin's tactics of random killings in order to instill a generalized sense of fear and insecurity in the Russian elite. And they provide a list, again, this list is a year and a half old, of 16 politicians, opposition politicians, business people who wouldn't go along with Putin's ideology, and also, such as it is, and wouldn't give him a piece of their action. He's killed diplomats. He's killed 122 journalists whose deaths were arranged by operatives of Putin and his regime. And it goes through the list, who they are, why he targeted them, and how they were murdered. Seems pretty serious to me. I'll just give you a few examples. Boris Nemtsov, 2015. In the 1990s, he was one of the leaders of post-Soviet Russia's young reformers. He became deputy prime minister and was for a while seen as possible presidential material. But it was Putin who succeeded Yeltsin in 2000. Nemtsov initially supported the choice, but he grew increasingly critical and was pushed to the margins of Russian political life. In February 2015, military involvement in Ukraine, Nemtsov was shot 4 times in the back by an unknown assailant within view of the Kremlin. Putin took personal control in the investigation. into the murder, but the killer remains at large. Boris Berezovsky, 2013, a self-styled tycoon who was a member of Yeltsin's inner circle in the late 1990s. He was instrumental in Putin's rise to power, including a media campaign that smeared Boris Nemtsov, who was upcoming with Putin to succeed Yeltsin. But Berezovsky soon fell out with Putin and left Russia for a comfortable self-exile in the UK. The distance from Russia emboldened him, and he declared that he would devote his and his considerable wealth to bring down Putin. He was also leading a campaign to investigate the November 2006 killing in London by the radioactive substance polonium in 2010 of Alexander Litvinenko, a former KGB agent who became a leading critic of Putin. In 2018, a British intelligence investigation established that 2 agents of the FSB, the KGB successor group, killed Litvinenko by slipping the radioactive material in his tea. You remember this. Anyway, Berezovsky was found dead inside a locked bathroom at his home in London, a noose around his neck, in what was at first deemed a suicide, but the coroner's office could not determine the cause of death. And it goes on and on and on. Well, Mark, why do we care about any of this? We'll get to that in a minute. Then we have this document from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, no doubt a neocon operation, no doubt about that. The federal contractors are behind this, no doubt about that. Putin's Not-So-Secret Mercenaries, Patronage, Geopolitics, and the Wagner Group by Nathaniel Reynolds. This is the Wagner Group that up until now you probably have never heard of before. Just a few points. Moscow first deployed Wagner in Ukraine at a time when the Kremlin needed to fight a covert war, hide casualties from the Russian public, and mitigate the international repercussions of a gross violation of a neighbor's sovereignty. The use of mercenaries or proxies is a tactic with deep roots in Russian history, most notably during the Cold War. By using so-called volunteers and other groups of the irregulars in Ukraine, Moscow nominally reduced the number of active-duty personnel and concealed their presence, at least initially. The recruitment of these groups happened quickly in 2014, and the Kremlin turned to private and state actors to finance and organize the effort. What else? Russia's covert war in Ukraine sparked Western alarm over Moscow's use of mercenaries and other deniable instruments of subversion. This is back in 2014, which are often lumped together as part of a so-called hybrid warfare. Concern remains that Moscow might secretly deploy Wagner or similar forces elsewhere in the post-Soviet space to start another covert war, destabilize a country through sabotage and subversion. By using mercenaries, as it did in Ukraine, Moscow would hope to sow confusion around its involvement, keep the West divided, and stay below obvious thresholds for a robust response. Mark, why are you getting into all these things? We know that Putin is a killer. We know he's an assassin. We know he has interests in the countries that surround Russia. We know he wants to rebuild the old Soviet Union, actually the Russian Empire. He wrote a long essay about it over the summer. What does that have to do with us? Everything. We have a Putin wing in the Republican Party. We have a Putin wing in the media. We have a Putin core in the Democrat Party and in academia. And you'll hear them and you'll see them, and they talk about how the United States may escalate war against Putin. Now, it's they, Lavrov and other lapdogs of Putin, who have talked about nuclear war. It is Putin himself who's talked about nuclear war. We're not. And they rarely ever criticize Putin, or they do it in a passing way in order to say something about the United States and how stupid we are and how stupid our generals are and so forth. Now, there may be that. I mean, Biden is the so-called commander-in-chief. He is a disgrace and a disaster. He actually has the Russians negotiating with the Iranians on a nuclear deal with us. What kind of a fool does that? I will never know. He puts more sanctions on the American oil industry and no sanctions on the Russian oil industry as I speak. What kind of a fool does that when we can use oil to debilitate the Russian economy, the Putin economy and war machine, rather than debilitate you, Mr. and Mrs. America? We do have a damn fool in the White House. There's no question about that. And we should be muscling up our military for any possibilities. And we're not. Despite spending trillions and trillions of massive debt, we are not muscling up the United States military. Russia, China, Iran, the axis of evil, the real axis of evil now that exists. But why does this matter? Because, ladies and gentlemen, I personally am sick and tired of hearing the excuses for Putin and the attacks on the United States, that we somehow are going to escalate something. We have been incredibly passive in the face of what Putin is doing. Diplomacy? Diplomacy? Look who the diplomats are. Look at the Secretary of State. He's pathetic. Look at the National Security Advisor. He's pathetic. We've never had such a pathetic team in modern American history, up against true, vile, genocidal maniacs. Xi, the regime in Tehran, and yes, the fascist Putin, who's busy running around and calling the Jewish leader, the president of Ukraine, a Nazi. Think about that. The bad guys, the evil guys, are the Russians. They're not the Ukrainians. They're not the Americans. They're not the NATO forces. But what does bother me is the Ukrainians need weapons to defend themselves. They were promised MiG-29s, and their pilots can fight in MiG-29s. That's what they use. All of a sudden, they were pulled back. I don't favor sending American infantry into Ukraine. Does anybody? I don't think even Lindsey Graham does. I don't favor a no-fly zone with American Air Force jets and so forth. But can we at least give these freedom fighters the right to defend themselves? They're now being brutalized. They're being slaughtered. They're being shot in the streets. Their women are being raped. There's torture taking place. What does this have to do with the United States? Do you think Putin is going to be happy with Ukraine any more than he was happy with Crimea, any more than he was happy with Georgia? He's told us what he wants to do. You think he's building hypersonic missiles to attack Kiev? He's building hypersonic missiles to get around our defense systems. The way China's building their Navy and their hypersonic missiles, you think they're doing that to attack Taiwan? Do you think the Iranians are building intercontinental ballistic missiles to hit Tel Aviv? They don't need intercontinental missiles to hit Tel Aviv, for which they want to put warheads on. By the time this administration's done in Washington, the Iranians will have nuclear missiles, China will have conquered Taiwan, and Russia may well be marching into other countries. Who's to stop them? And by the way, I would remind you, Taiwan's not part of NATO. Does that mean we don't help defend them? Israel's not part of NATO. Does that mean we don't help defend them? What about South Korea if they're attacked? Do we not do anything about that? Where is the line for the appeasers, for the sellouts, for the neocon artists who are out there preaching peace but provoking war? You know, these genocidal maniacs, when they see weakness, as they did in our withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was an absolute horrific disaster where 9,000 American citizens still are behind enemy lines, where 13 brave Americans were slaughtered for no reason. You know what? When the enemy sees weakness, the enemy strikes. So they see weakness in the Oval Office. They see weakness around the Oval Office. They see weakness, much weakness, in our media. And they see weakness, period. Period. We should be arming up the Ukrainians with whatever they need. That's number one. We should turn on our oil and natural gas spigots like never before, drive the Russia military machine into the ground, and stop their troops cold. Number two, we should cut off all negotiations with Iran immediately, let alone having Russia as the point to negotiate. That's why Biden will not put sanctions on their oil, because he supposedly needs the Russians to negotiate our deal with the Iranians.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.